Hi, everyone. This is Andy Wheelock, part of the Coffee with the Geek program. And I'm going to just showcase for everyone, if I can do this without showing the entire screen here. There we go. I do want to just talk to you quickly about my new blog because I broke away from my other blog site, which was Weebly, which I love, but I went to a Blogger account. So I now have a new Coffee with the Geek blog, and it has coffeewiththegeek.org. So I hope you'll follow me here, and you'll see all the interviews I do, as well as some information about me. And today's conversation with John Spencer will be here. If you want to watch it afterwards, I'd love to have you be a part of our broadcast. So with me today, I'm going to bring up his website, is John Spencer. And John, I have really followed through Twitter, and that's, again, a lot of the people that I touch base with are part of Twitter, the Twitterverse, shall we say. And John is just, I've really kind of watched an evolution, John, and I'd like to talk to you about that, from seeing kind of your tweet to coming back to your website and seeing just really this explosion of creativity and authorship and educational excellence. Your blog is really, I think, good to read, and your spencerauthor.com is your main site. And you can also come across his books. And you've just written a book called Launch, which we'll talk about in a second, with AJ Giuliani, which is also an amazing educator and person to follow and connect with. And you can get John's book. John has more than just the last book, Launch, but he has Confident Voices, The Fireproof Teacher, and A Sustainable Start. All of those available on Amazon, and you can also get those. I think you can get the digital copies, all of them are on paperback as well. So it's really easy to get in touch with John and see some of his work. I also watched you did a TED Talk not too long ago, and that is available to watch. It's actually a TEDx talk. And so, John, thank you for joining me today. And it's a real honor and pleasure. I'm going to actually just sharing that. And thank you for joining me. And again, just tell me about, if you would, and I also want to just say you are an assistant professor right now in Oregon. In educational technology, correct?
Yes, I am.
And personally, you have a couple kids I saw. And
yeah,
you were a
3 kids.
former 12-year middle school teacher.
Yes.
So that probably put you through the ring of fire, correct?
I loved it. It was a blast. There were definitely some challenging days, but it was a fun age group to work with. Yeah.
Okay, so if I could just again kind of talk about the evolution that I saw taking place as I looked at your Twitter feeds and then looked at your blog. What has inspired maybe your blog and maybe that evolution? And can you tell me about the learning curve of your adventures here in education?
Yeah, so I think I started out. I started blogging years ago. It was a little over a decade ago when I first did my first blog. And I kind of blogged about everything. It was kind of a reflection space that I would share, stories from the classroom. And I think about, it kind of evolved over time. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, I hit a place where, I had really been critical of standardized testing and things like that. And I kind of hit a place where I thought, I want to advocate for things, not just bash things. I want to talk about the things that I'm passionate about, and so if standardization and one size fits all was the thing I didn't like, what was the solution that I wanted to advocate? And it struck me that, for me, it really came down to creativity and design thinking, and I'd been using design thinking for about a decade at that point, almost. It's probably my second year of teaching when I really began to embrace design thinking as an idea. And so I kind of said, I'm going to really pursue that as sort of the solution. And then the other kind of evolution I feel like that happened on my blog was just and Twitter and all has been kind of my willingness to draw, like doing sketchy videos, making my own visuals instead of just getting, pictures from online, but, sketching things out myself and letting that side of my personality kind of come out in my blog as well. And that's been in the last year or so as well.
Tell me about your books, because I think, it seems like it was such a natural extension from good blog writing to books. Can you talk about your books and maybe the focus? What is your audience that you'd like to connect with? Again, maybe your collaboration with AJ Giuliani, and also about your books.
Yeah, so the first couple of books I did were just self-published books that were kind of an extension of my blog. So I would do kind of a blog series and say, all right, I'm gonna turn this into a book and just see how it goes. And that was, you see it right there with A Sustainable Start, The Fireproof Teacher. And then, I had done a pretty short Corwin Connect book on a very specific topic of, ELL and technology, which was something I was into. Obviously, I'm kind of into tech. But in the case of Launch, that was sort of a different process. I'd never co-written a book before. It was funny. I had done a podcast for a while and a few other small projects with AJ Giuliani, and we were becoming pretty good friends. And I said, hey, I want to write this book. I was going to call it The Creative Classroom, and I wanted to cover design thinking and PBL and several different things. And he said, hey, wait, I want to write a book about design thinking. We should just do this together. And so it morphed from The Creative Classroom, which was the original idea, into a book called Launch, focused on design thinking. And it was the first time ever, I feel like, that I actually spent a long time on a book. Didn't just write a blog series, but really sat down and wrote a book and edited and re-edited and worked together. And we kind of had a similar writing style that allowed it to be seamless. I feel like in between who's writing what, it's kind of hard to tell. And so we ended up publishing that through Dave Burgess. He's the guy that wrote Teach Like a Pirate, and he has a publishing company. But it was a really cool experience. It was the first time that I spent almost a year on something like this.
Can you tell me the first kind of thought that comes to mind? And I think a lot of teachers would have this, is being as active you are in education as a teacher and as a parent. When do you fit the time in for a book? Is there some strategies that you had to kind of work with to put aside that time for writing?
Yeah, I think for me, I always write. I mean, that's just what I do. So for me, getting up at 5 or 6 in the morning and having an hour or two every day to write is just what it comes down to. And so, I'll usually 2 or 3 times a week write a blog post, and that'll take up to an hour to do a longer blog post. My posts lately have been, closer to that, 1,500 word mark, whereas when I first started, they were a lot of, 300 or 400 word posts. And I don't know why I've gotten longer, but I tend to write longer posts. But then on my off days, I'm gonna, in an hour or so, do the same thing, write 1,000 words, 2,000 words. So it's kind of, when you do the math, you think, if you're writing 1,000 words a day, when you take 2 months, you've got 60,000 words to work with, right? That's a good chunk of text that you can work with. And so that would be the advice I give is, write what you're comfortable with each day, whether it's 500 words or 1,000 words or 1,500 words. And then just stick with it. The hardest thing for people to realize, I think, when it comes to writing is that your first draft sucks, right? And that it doesn't sound good until you revise it. And I think I dealt with that when I taught journalism to my students. Your first draft isn't going to be any good, and that's okay. And people have a really hard time creating something that's bad, but then when you revise it, that's when it becomes good.
When you talked about that, the revising and editing process, that kind of reminded me of us at gaming, you know, where you're constantly trying to level through a game, level up, I guess, and work through a level, and you don't give up until you have it right. Have you followed kind of the gaming and education process?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of something. You know, it's funny. I I don't feel like I ever had a kind of gamified classroom at all, um, necessarily. You know, when I taught social studies, when I first began as a teacher, I would do game like simulations, for example. You know, to teach the alliance system, we would do risk, and that would teach imperialism in the alliance system. Or I developed this, you know, communism, capitalist, socialist, monopoly game, things like that. But the actual like gamification and moving through levels is something I've never really experimented with. But yeah, I've been working on a book for a while on flow theory and student engagement. And one of the things that intrigued me a lot is the whole game-based learning, gamifying things, but also just game theory in general and what that does for flow. You know, how people move incrementally through levels to move up. It's not something that I've ever been able to pull off well in teaching. But I'm really intrigued by the way it works. You know, the sense of constantly, you know, matching your skills with a challenge, the incremental feedback, the immediacy of it. I find it fascinating. It's just not something I've ever been able to like pull off really well.
Can you maybe, for myself, probably more than anybody, is give me maybe a definition, a working definition for design thinking, and then what you were talking with flow, with both of them. And I just want to make sure I'm wrapping my brain around the right context.
Okay.
Can you bring some definition to those?
Sure. So I'll start with flow theory. You know, flow theory is a theory about engagement. And it comes from positive psychology, and it's basically this idea that you hit these moments when you are in the zone, right? In basketball, you saw it with, you know, Michael Jordan would hit a state of flow, and suddenly he's hitting every shot, and things seem effortless. You lose track of time, things slow down, but they speed up at the same time. You're really into what you're doing, but you're also kind of distant from what you're doing. It's a very paradoxical experience that people experience, and it happens a lot in creative work, right? So let's say you're a writer, you just get lost in what you're doing, and for 3 hours you're writing and you forget to even get a drink of water. I mean, you're so hyper focused. So that's kind of this idea of flow, and I think it's a critical piece of creative work. But it can also be true, like I said, of sports. It can be true on consuming rather than creating, right? People hit a state of flow when they're reading a book that they really love. And so that's kind of where the flow piece comes in. Now, design thinking, on the other hand, is this framework for creative work. It works for individual creative work, but it also works for collaborative team work. And you know, the history of design thinking is really interesting in the fact that before STEAM was a deal, it was STEAM, right? It was something that was embraced in the visual arts, but also in urban planning and also in engineering. So it was 3 different areas that design thinking kind of sprouted out in the late 50s. So it's really an old idea, and it became refined in different areas. It's similar to the scientific method. It's similar to the publishing cycle. There's a lot of similarities that you'll see with design thinking, but it is basically a way of thinking that pushes creative thought. And so there's a lot of different models out there. AJ Giuliani and I developed the launch cycle. We added a couple areas that I think are important. We have an inquiry area and a research area to our model, because I think the media literacy and the research is important. I think when we think about design, we need to think about research and design rather than just design. So we have kind of a research phase we added that you don't see in the D-School model or the IDEO model. And then we also have the launch, which is the last piece, the thing where you send it to an authentic audience. But the goal is for student ownership through every part, from awareness to research to ideating and brainstorming and planning, through creating and then revision and then launching to an authentic audience. And it's kind of the cycle that they go through. So that's the basic gist of it.
Do you think in today's work world, those are essential skills or essential, I guess, notions of how a lot of corporations now are working? I guess Google would be the obvious example of doing business different. Do you think that lines kids up with some more success opportunities?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think, one of the interesting things for me is I feel like I've used design thinking and that model outside of school for a long time. And I used it in the nonprofit world when I was in college for program development. I used it for creative arts, for designing, physical products and essentially art. But it's also used to plan events. It's used to plan projects. It's used all over social spaces, civic spaces, business spaces. And, I was sharing with a tech developer and he laughed and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's what we use. That's absolutely what we use. This is identical." And then I was sharing it with somebody else who was kind of in the visual arts and said, wow, this is so similar to what we use. And so, design thinking, that's one of the things I love about it as a framework, is it produces all of these transferable skills that kids will use in whatever venue in life they go for in creative work. So if they go into technology, if they go into traditional business, if they go into entrepreneurial work, they have this framework that they know inside and out that they can use to boost creativity and innovation.
I loved, you've created a bunch of videos, and one of them that I've used for professional development workshops with teachers is your SAMR model video. Can you talk a little bit about that creation process of making videos? I know you've done a lot more than that video, but can you talk about maybe how teachers can develop videos of their own? What are the steps that you go through for those?
So, there's a lot of different ways that somebody can make one of those sketch videos. Excuse me. There are different programs out and things like that. But my process is pretty low tech, for lack of a better term. I sketch them out by hand. Then I scan whatever pictures I have that I've sketched out on just a regular scanner. I always scan as a PNG in text mode, so not in photo mode, but in text mode, and that guarantees that if I drew something in pencil or pen, it shows up in crisp black and white either way. And then for the longest time, I used GIMP. Now I use Photoshop, but I use that to kind of create the animation. And it's sort of, you can imagine it like a old school flip book where, one thing moves to the next, to the next, to the next. And then I just put all of those into iMovie, and then I kind of modify that according to my voice. And some of them take a long time and some of them are really short. I did this one that it probably took almost 8 hours to do. But then, like the SAMR model was a pretty simple one that didn't require a ton of animation, not a lot of movement going on. So that probably took, an hour to 2 hours to do. So it really varies according to the video. And that's my basic process. I want to share a quick story about that. I was real reluctant to do any kind of sketch videos, any kind of sketches on my blog for the longest time. Because when I was in high school, I loved art. So when I was a kid, I loved art. And when I was in high school, I signed up for the advanced art after I had gone through the basic art course. And the teacher looked at me and said, you know, advanced art is really more for serious artists. And that just stuck with me. I continued to doodle, to sketch, to draw, to paint, all of those things, but I completely hid that. So it never went anywhere public at all. The beginning of that changing for me was that when I taught middle school, and I had some kids who wanted to paint a mural, which was actually part of, we went through the design thinking process to figure out how we could take care of graffiti on campus. And their design solution ended up being painting a mural. We painted a mural. It was the only area that was not tagged up on campus. It was a really cool experience. But I remember wanting to find an artist in residence, and we couldn't. And so I had to step in and do that. And it was the first time that I was ever open about the fact that I love to create visual art. But then it wasn't for another 7 or 8 years at all that I shared something publicly where I was drawing. And so I mentioned that story because I think there's a lot of people who are like, I would love to sketchnote, I would love to do sketchy videos, but I'm not very artistic, or I don't draw very well. And what I would argue is, you know, people who feel that way probably think they have bad handwriting. You know, everyone thinks they have bad handwriting, but they don't. Everyone thinks that they have a horrible voice when they hear their own voice recorded, right? But they don't. And I think the same thing is true of sketching. You know, you don't have to be Da Vinci to sketch something. Like everyone's doodles have their own personality.
Maybe to tie into that, the SAMR model, obviously redefinition is the kind of big step. Do you think schools are getting to that redefinition, and how can we help them? How can we help them get there? I know that's kind of a big, all-encompassing question, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a real challenge, and I think it comes from a couple things. One is, you know, we tend to take things from old media and then try to translate it, and that's the lowest level on SAMR. And so, you know, we're just substituting one thing for the other. You know, a notebook is now a Google Doc. A handout is now a HyperDoc. I mean, they're not any different. And I think a second one comes from this really good motive that I hear all the time, where people say, it's not about the technology, it's about the pedagogy. Let the pedagogy drive the technology. And that's fine. I get that. That's really important. Except when people do that, they a lot of times deny the power of the technology. They're like, it doesn't matter what technology you use. It's all about the learning. It's all about the pedagogy. So they miss the connective power of technology, and then they also miss the creative power of technology. And it happens all the time. You know, case in point, there are a lot of professors at the university who, when they teach an online course, it's basically an online book study. You know, read a chapter and join a discussion board. Read a chapter, join a discussion board. And these professors will have a really dynamic face-to-face class, but when they teach online, all they can see is everything they can't do online that they can do in person. And they miss all these things that they can do, leveraging the connective and creative power of the technology. So I think all of those play a role in why you don't see that true transformation happening.
So you had a TED Talk, and tell me about that process for anyone who wants to give that a whirl. And was it nerve-wracking?
It was nerve-wracking. It was fun. It was, so, you know, it was actually that's actually part of the way that I got to know AJ Giuliani was it was his school. He approached me about doing a TED Talk, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. We weren't good friends at that point. You know, we'd never done any collaborative projects or anything like that at that point, but it was fun. And it was absolutely nerve-wracking because you have to stand in the red circle, the light's on you, it's all dark. But also it was my first time giving any kind of talk where I had been videotaped. So, you know, I had always done like a keynote, but with a keynote, you can see audience reaction everywhere. You can move around, and it's and you're not being videotaped. So it was absolutely terrifying. It was so, and then the other piece is that, you know, all these other speakers were really impressive people. So I felt like I looked around at these other people who were talking and I was like, dang, I am out of my league here. This is crazy. But it was a neat experience.
Going off of that, I mean, when you started your teaching career, did you ever picture yourself where you are now?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, you know, for me, like, um, even when I started blogging, for example, it was like a way for me to share how I'm doing as a teacher with other, like to stay in contact with my friends from college, right? It was all these other people who'd gone to ASU and they were reading my posts and commenting, and but it was you know, no big deal. In fact, the first couple of years of blogging, I didn't even blog on like a traditional blog. I blogged on MySpace back in the day. If you remember that, MySpace was like brand new, and then I moved from that to like a real blog on Blogger, you know. But from that phase of, you know, 2000 whatever 2003 to 2007, I blogged on MySpace. um and I didn't even think about audience. I didn't think about global connections. I didn't think about the friendships I would make with people online, the collaborative projects I would do. And I certainly didn't think I would be, you know, writing books, doing speaking, doing these kinds of projects. Like I could not have imagined it. It was just, here's my little space where I'm going to reflect.
Maybe tying this all together, because again, as I said, when I started, I saw you on Twitter and then started following you and then keeping track of your blog, and I noticed this impressive evolution. I have kind of maybe this half-baked theory that really blogging helps us kind of define who we are and where we're going, because I see such a powerful transformation for a lot of different people. And I think most of the people I talked to started off with just a really simple blog, and it just blossomed into something really amazing. Do you think that blogging has that power?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think blogging has that power because you get to build an audience on one hand, but then you also get to be a part of a community, you know. So you're not like, um, it, it just changes your self-efficacy. It gives you the permission to take creative risks and to evolve. You know, when you're writing a book, it's so permanent, it's so there, it's so. But a blog post, you can evolve, you can change, you can morph over time, and I think between the community and the evolution and the ease of publishing, it just makes blogging this really cool dynamic space where you do, like you said, you get to just define who you are. And it's interesting because for me, I mean, on one level it's defining who you are, but then on the other level it's gaining the confidence to be who you are, right? So, you know, the blog posts you read from me now are probably more me than the blog posts you would have read 7 years ago, because I feel more confident being creative or sketching something out or sharing a story about my family, or, you know, things that I wouldn't have done at first.
Well, John, I'm going to keep following you on Twitter and your blog, and I can't wait to see what you come up with next. But before I let you go, I want to turn you out to the Speed Geek questions. Again, these are quick, short answers. And
Okay.
let me just bring up the magic wheel here. Let me know if you can see it. There we go. Let me see. Can you see that? You see the
Yes.
Speed Geek questions? Okay.
Yes.
So here we go. We're going to give it a whirl here. So question number one is, name your favorite educational blog.
That is tough. I knew. You know, I think that's really tough. I think actually my favorite is probably Jackie Gerstein's blog. I've been reading that for a long time, and she's so crazy smart and pushes my thinking all the time. So that's probably my favorite one.
That's a good one. I should come back and spend some more time with that one. Like you said, there's so many great ones.
There are so many great ones. Yeah.
All right, next question is, are you a gamer and what's your game?
I'm not much of a gamer, but my all-time favorite game forever always has been Tetris. And I know it's a little embarrassing, but it's a little old school. But if I ever hit a creative block where I don't know what to do, I'll either go take a walk or I'll just play about 10 minutes of Tetris. And there's something about it that like allows me to get past my writer's block or my creative block.
Oh, good strategy. Okay, and your last one. What was your first storage device?
Are you meaning like a digital storage device?
Yeah, floppy disk, cassette.
Yes, yeah. My first one was the old school. What is it, like 5.5-inch floppy disk? Like we had this handy computer, I remember, and we'd have to put that in. Yeah, that was definitely my first.
Well, that's pretty good. I still got you beat. Cassette tape was mine, so.
I had friends who had those. They were really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had the 5-inch, and we'd put them in a plastic crate. It was like this big with all these. Oh my gosh.
Yep. Still have any?
No, I don't. I don't have any. I wish I did, because I feel like at some point they become like historic relics, right? I wish. My dad recently, gosh, probably 2 years ago, sold his old cell phone, the big massive phone from like 1987. And I was like, Dad, why did you do that? I would have taken it, because I want to like someday show my grandkids this is what my dad used as a cell phone.
I know, it's amazing how technology has changed.
Yeah, we the other day we were watching Star Trek, because we're nerds in our family. So I was so worried you would ask me the Star Trek Star Wars, because I actually like but my kids were making fun of their fat iPads, when they were holding. Man, their iPads are so fat. I can't believe that they're using iPads. What generation iPad is that? And I was like, no, that was considered really amazing, like the future back then.
I know. Well, it's a bright future for them. They're going to see a lot of amazing things. So
They are, absolutely.
Okay. All right, well, John, thank you so much for your time, and keep up the great work. I'll be watching.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, my pleasure.